Hello, Manchester and some of our surrounding communities. We're happy to welcome you back to the Progress Report because it's Wednesday. It's the Progress Report as it has been for, what'd you say, 8 years, Mike?
Yep.
We've been doing this for 8 years?
Yep. Week after
We
week,
haven't-
day after day.
We haven't got a divorce yet?
Not well.
Something
no.
must be working.
We very rarely argue about things. Actually, it's
Well,
kind of
we have done it.
on
but
occasion.
it
Yeah,
is-
during
it
the
is-
during
it
the
is.
presidential primary and on the
Yeah.
Democratic side,
Yeah,
we
we did that.
We had our disagreements, but
Oh, my God.
we managed. Nobody got any black eyes.
Nobody
you
got
know.
any black eyes. That's right. That was minor
And
compared
we
to
use our words.
the split in my own household. That was even worse.
Yeah, but it made you famous. You were on Vermont
Yeah,
Public Radio
right,
and
right,
everything
right.
else. You know.
60 Minutes didn't call, so it's a disappointment. Well, we are going to have a great program tonight, folks. We have one of our fine guests that we haven't had for a while, Chris Pappas, District 4 Executive Counselor, has agreed to join us, and he's a busy guy, so we're really glad to have him here. And we're going to talk about a whole number of issues, and we hope you'll participate. 640-3091 is the call-in number, and we do always welcome your calls on the Progress Report. So we'll be talking principally about state issues today, but thanks to Mike's great inspiration, we have a feature in this program that's part of his.
Lead off.
We lead off with his feature he suggested called POTUS on the Progress.
Well, you're almost right. It's the POTUS report on the Progress Report.
Okay.
But I know that's redundant. But and welcome, folks, to this week's edition of the POTUS report on the Progress Report. And
May I say this week seems to be a target-rich environment,
yeah,
as the military says?
I'm jumping right into the big story, and that is the firing of James Comey as director of the FBI well in advance of the expiration of his 10-year term. Not completely unprecedented, but certainly the precedent for this is tricky at best.
Well, there's only one precedent. It happened to be a guy named Sessions,
Yeah, absolutely.
not related to the current Attorney General
And
who's
that was,
recused.
That was
sometimes.
Bill
Yeah.
Clinton who let that Attorney General go. But that was in the face of several misappropriation of funds and improper use of assets complaints. So it was a little bit of a different story.
Yes.
People looking back, I'm getting way far afield of my POTUS report and the Progress Report, but people looking back are comparing this more to the Saturday Night Massacre, which is not a perfect analogy, but it sure feels very similar to that.
Well, it's kind of the closest thing we had.
And that would be when Richard Nixon fired Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor who was investigating the Watergate break-in. So that's where the analogy
let us
comes
remember
in.
that unlike this one, there was an Attorney General in office at that time named Elliot
Richardson, who refused.
who refused,
And
and
resigned.
he was the quintessential Yankee. If there were Archibald Cox too, they were true Yankee Brahmins. I think they were both New Englanders, and Richardson resigned rather than do this, and his deputy, a guy named William Ruckelshaus, also resigned and refused to do this.
And it fell upon a Solicitor General by the name of Robert Bork,
Third in command in the Department of Justice,
who
did the
apparently
deed.
had no qualms about doing the deed.
He did the
fired Archibald Cox, and it is said that was the spark, the trigger that led down the road to the ultimate impeachment hearings and to Nixon's resignation.
Yep.
Certainly we're too early into it to know here. But there were a couple interesting things I wanted to bring up just about the firing that may or may not have been reported widely. One of them is the way it was actually done. Comey was actually speaking in Los Angeles to the Los Angeles FBI when the news of his firing came up on the television monitors in the room. And he thought it was a prank and actually made a comment to the effect of nice prank guys, whereupon he was pulled into another office by his staff and told that it was not a prank. That certainly is a very disrespectful way to convey your feelings. The letter was written and signed directly by Donald Trump, and it included a statement that Trump appreciated that Comey had told him 3 times that he was not the target of investigation, gratuitously thrown in. But here's the point I want to make. It was delivered not by the usual course. It was Donald Trump's personal bodyguard, Keith Schiller, who delivered the letter firing. Not this is not a resignation. He was fired. Firing.
He
James
was not
Comey.
given the option to resign.
He has been Trump's personal bodyguard for over 17 years. Former New York City law enforcement officer. He began working for Trump as a part-time bodyguard, moonlighting from his job as a New York police officer. And he was, in January, was given the title of Director of Oval Office Operations. So he is in the administration now. And basically he keeps the schedule for Donald Trump. But this was it kind of reminds me of a mob hit where you know your capo is sent out to actually get the deed done as opposed to go in normal circumstances. Another point I wanted to make out, and I'm going far too long, but I'll go as fast as I can. This firing took place on the exact same day that a report came in from Acting Attorney General, and I forget the gentleman's name, but basically the report, which appears to be a wallpaper job, citing the reasons why Comey should be fired, chief among them, of course, being his handling of the Hillary Clinton email scandal back during the election cycle, which Trump applauded at the time, but now cites as a reason to fire the gentleman.
And if anybody believes that, we've got bridges in Brooklyn we can sell you.
And the point I wanted to make was that, don't forget, it took 22 days after receiving notice of international espionage on the part of Mike Flynn before he was fired. But yet this wallpaper job comes in, and Comey gets fired that very same day and is advised of it through the television. Two more points. It certainly is a nice jujitsu on the Democrats, who've been calling for Comey's resignation because of the way he handled the email reporting during the election. And of course, now being up in arms because for a very different reason, it kind of looks like they're changing their tune with regard to Comey. But of course, I think the American people can see through it. This is a different reason for the outrage on this point. And finally, last but not least, this firing was specifically and expressly done on the recommendation of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who
was supposedly
was recused from the situation.
He was recused.
So I want to know, what does recusal mean to Jeff Sessions if it does not include firing the chief investigator in the case? So that is the POTUS report on the progress report. More questions than answers, but I just wanted to kind of bring those angles to the table.
Well, you brought something new that I didn't know about, with his bodyguard being the guy that delivered the dagger in the napkin or whatever it is. But you know, we can make light of this, but this is I feel real concern about, protecting the essential elements of American democracy. Separation of powers, accountability, the rule of law. All those things seem to me, at stake here to some degree. I hope it's not to a major degree, but it's not a laughing matter. It's not a laughing matter. And I am waiting for the responsible Republicans, and I want to believe, and I'm sure Chris does, because he's been very bipartisan in his entire political career, that there are Republicans that will put the interests of the country ahead of partisan interests. And I'm just waiting for this to happen, because we got to get to the bottom of this. We've got to get to the bottom of the Russian interference in our elections, and whether Trump is compromised. Flynn was fired because it was finally realized that he was compromised by his ties to the Russians, and maybe Trump is too. We don't know.
We don't know.
We got to find that out.
But I do think that the circumstances of this firing, separate and apart from the firing itself, which has its own issues, the circumstances, the way it was done, by whom it was done, and with the speed with which it was done, was meant to send a ripple of chilling effect throughout
the total
unbelievability
of the stated reasons. They don't add up, and nobody can believe that Trump was trying to fire this guy because he was too tough on Hillary Clinton. I mean, come on, Hey, wait a minute.
You're not buying it?
We're having too much fun here with this, it's a matter of not just fun. I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's very serious. And I remember when I was in the Saturday Night Massacre, and Jesus, that was an unbelievable thing. And the American people did rise up, and they said, "No more. We can't put up with this." Anyhow, we have issues to discuss with Counselor Chris Pappas, and thanks for coming and listening to us. inveigh on this.
Good to be with you. Well, there's a lot of material out there, right?
It's a target-rich
you could do a
environment.
whole show, certainly, just on the last 24 hours.
We usually
Yeah.
try to keep it to 3 or 4 minutes. Got spilled over a little bit here
Right,
today.
right. But
Apologies.
these are concerning times,
They are.
and it's a time that people need to be engaged and aware of what's going on. I think this administration, in particular, would love the media to go away and let it do its own business.
Well, they've called them the
without,
enemies of the
any
people,
daylight.
haven't they?
That's right.
I mean, come on, jeez, crow. We have 10 amendments. We hear an awful lot about the Second Amendment from certain aspects of our political culture, but the First Amendment includes freedom of the press, and
And
the
it came
press is
first.
under attack. Yeah, and it was first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you ask where those Republicans are, right, that should be standing up here. They don't appear to be in the House of Representatives.
They certainly don't.
There are a few adults in the Senate, and I'm hopeful that, whether it's the investigation of Russia, whether it's the Trump Care bill that's now in the hands of the Senate, that they'll be the responsible ones, and there will be a few, I hope, that step forward and are able to work in a bipartisan fashion to do the right thing for this country.
And
I
it seems
certainly
more and
hope
more
so.
are speaking up. I think they're looking around for cover. But once the critical mass is reached, I think there's a desire to speak out against this that's just politically right now a little bit difficult for them.
Yeah. So, Chris, thank you for joining us. We know that you're a fourth-generation owner of a Manchester institution, the Puritan.
100 years now.
100 years?
Last month we had our 100th anniversary.
No kidding.
Free ice cream?
We gave out about 5,000 ice cream cones. We probably had a few repeat
Sorry, I missed
customers
that.
in there, even though we were trying to keep it to one per person.
Which is
but,
kind of interesting because we've had an explosion of good restaurants arriving in
great.
Manchester. I mean, it's it's a foodie town now.
The restaurant scene is incredible in
Vibrant.
Manchester.
Vibrant.
You're right.
It's-
And
it's-
But you
it's
still
making
can't get
Manchester
into
a
the Puritan
destination.
for dinner if it's...
No,
you still
and-
have to wait at the Puritan many evenings if you're there at the time of peak demand. So
Right.
you guys are certainly not losing.
But
from
we've
this.
never worried about the competition because I think that the stronger the industry is, the better it is for
Yeah.
everyone in some respect. So I think Manchester's showing that right now.
Yeah. And how many terms you're in your third term?
This is the beginning of my third term on the
beginning of your
executive
third term.
council, so beginning that fifth year, and I can't believe it's already this point in time where I'm one of the most senior members on the executive council, if you can
Imagine
believe
that.
it.
Imagine
And I'm now working with my second governor, Chris Sununu, who's a former member of the council.
And the first time you've had to work with a Republican.
That's
governor.
right. That's right. And people ask that question all the time. How is Chris Sununu to work with? What's it like? You're a Democrat working with a Republican governor. I mean, I think by and large, there's not much change, right? The business of government has to go forward, and if you're talking about hiring someone for a professional board, that's not a Republican or Democrat issue. If you're talking about, a department hiring a consultant, that's not a political issue necessarily. So, for 95% of what we do, it's business as usual, and what the state needs to get done is going to get accomplished. There are some issues where we have some differences.
Yeah.
And
Some of the
There are
appointments,
some
for example, right?
And some contracts that might be controversial that we went through last year, for example.
Sure, absolutely. But on a personal level, I get along with Governor Sununu. I think it's great that we have a governor who is a former member of the council, and he tends to give a lot of deference to the executive council. Whereas some governors would make an argument during an executive council meeting, he tends to bring items to us and say, "What's your pleasure?" And if we want to take some more time with it and table it, he'll allow us to do that. So I really appreciate how he's handling the council and really, letting us have a prominent role in state government right now, as we should.
Yeah.
As we should. We help provide an important check and balance on not just the power of the governor, but of state agencies. We help give people a voice in their state government. So I think we have a very important role to play, and I'm glad the governor recognizes that. Now, there have been some, fault lines and some differences, and I would say some of his appointments have really missed the mark. This
For
year.
example, the Commissioner of Education.
Sure.
perhaps.
He nominated someone for Commissioner of Education, Frank Edelblut, who was an opponent of his in his Republican primary for governor. Frank had never set foot, essentially, in a public school in New Hampshire before he was nominated as commissioner.
Yeah,
he
7
homeschooled
children.
his 7 kids, which
All
is,
7 of them.
is certainly great, and that was his choice. But he lacked the understanding of what New Hampshire schools are like. He certainly had never been through a district like Manchester and really grappled with the problems that Manchester kids experience and teachers experience. So he's had a learning process here. He's gone around the state. From my observations, I find that he's doing a lot more talking than listening. And so, he's someone who appears to have an agenda. He's a guy who's in a hurry. And I really wish that he would strike a more cooperative tone, listen to the experts within the department, and really just be the implementer that he promised to be.
He came out with a big reorganization plan for the whole department.
That's
I mean,
right. One of his first
seems
acts
quite
was to go to the
rapid.
legislature to enhance his powers as commissioner. Now, for someone that is just getting acquainted with the role, that seems to be going well beyond the bounds of what should be acceptable, especially in a
little
state like New
presumptuous.
Hampshire.
Yeah.
So, I think he's someone that we've got to watch and got to keep in check because, he's supported things in the past that I think are going to be dangerous for a district like Manchester, siphoning off of public dollars to private and parochial schools. He's opposed
That's
statewide
the
kindergarten,
voucher.
which is something that the governor is trying to get some funding for. Could mean a lot for Manchester.
There's something-
I'd like
there's
to talk
something-
about that too.
Yeah,
I want
go ahead.
to dive into that because
Sure.
we here in Manchester provide full-day kindergarten on our own back, on the back of our taxpayers, because we think it's the right thing to do, and we've been doing it for years. And now we have an opportunity up at the state level to get some funding from the state, which, by the way, is tax money that we pay to the state. It would only be coming back. We're not asking for a handout. And yet we have state reps here in Manchester, representing Manchester, who are voting against this on philosophical grounds. I mean, could you explain to us how that makes sense, that Manchester should refuse state funding for full-day kindergarten?
I can't, because I can't wrap my head around how an elected representative could vote against something that Manchester already provides that could provide some really critical funding resources for the city and for schools in Manchester. So I think
And
that's a huge mistake.
And we had a Manchester representative who did exactly
Sure.
that. I just can't believe it.
And look, it's important for 2 reasons, that statewide kindergarten funding piece. One, it provides relief for districts like Manchester that already do it. And 2, it's an incentive to the districts that don't do it. We have a number of districts across the state that have half-day that we really would like to see to go to that full-day model, and this would be an incentive for them to adopt.
And I'd certainly be willing to put my $10 down on the table to say that many of those districts would like to have it, just can't afford it,
Yeah.
and this funding would make all the difference to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the studies, and in terms of readiness of kids of entering elementary school, and making sure they're ready for those first few grades. The brain development that happens at an early age and continues, when they're in kindergarten. It's so important for so many reasons.
We're coming up against a break, but I want to talk about that particular concept of these studies because I've heard anti-education people, typically Republicans, come back and say, yeah, but by the 5th and 6th grade, it equalizes.
Well, and that's what the Commissioner of Education tried to tell me in the hearing when I
But
asked him about it.
But that actually, that's bogus because we see in later studies, if you follow these cohorts, that it actually, in the end, in the high school years, it does show advancement. So, I mean, I just, it's,
I think
that argument, I think,
you're
is,
right.
I don't know where that argument comes from.
Right. Well, Brian's telling us it's time for our first
Well,
break.
let's take a quick break because I'm obviously off track. I got to get
No,
back
you're
on
not.
track.
No, you're not. We got lots more to cover. Once again, we urge calls in, and we welcome callers at 640-3091. We are on with third term, newly in his third term, District 4 Executive Councilor Chris Pappas, for the first time serving as part of a governing council, where the governor is a member of the opposition party. And we're learning how that goes, and we'd like to participate. We got lots of subjects to cover, so we'll be right back. So here we are with this Wednesday's edition of the Progress Report, May 10th, I believe. And
It is,
very
May
pleased,
10th.
I got it right this time.
You did.
I'm very pleased to have with us third-term Executive Councilor Chris Pappas from Manchester, but he represents a district going far beyond Manchester, as all the councilors do. And, of course, he's carries on the great tradition in Manchester, or one of our great institutions, the Puritan Restaurant, as I'm sure all our viewers know and appreciate. Wednesday is usually the time when the Executive Council meets. I gather, Chris, there was no actual meeting today except to deal with a candidate for an important state position.
Sure. Yeah, it was another one of the governor's nominees for the Department of Administrative Services. They basically make all the trains run on time within state government in terms of procurement or public works projects that go on in state buildings. Any kind of personnel-related matters go through that department. So this person's essentially the COO of the state of New Hampshire. So it's one of the toughest jobs in state government.
Yeah.
We've burned through a couple commissioners. This most recent one, great commissioner, Vicki Queerum, who's moving off to California to be with her family, closer to her grandkids. She's
We're going to miss her.
yeah, she's a big loss in her departure. And so the governor nominated Charlie Arlinghouse, who's ran a conservative think tank. He was the budget director for Governor Sununu for the last few months. So we had a hearing with him today. Interesting to hear some of his responses. He's very new. He hasn't run a large organization. So those are some concerns. And he's coming out of a public policy and opinion arena where it's a very ideological framework through which he views issues.
It
to
seems the
one where
position
he's
is
got to
a
be
nuts and bolts and,
this is-
and stamps and paper clips
right.
kind of a
This
situation.
is where you have to be very even-handed, work with both parties in the legislature, and just be focused on how to make government work.
You used a word that just gets me going, ideological, because I see so much principally on the opposition side. Maybe some of us are guilty of it too, but I see it on the opposition side, where the ideology trumps everything, including the facts and good traditions that should be preserved, everything, and that would concern me very much about Mr. Arlinghouse, this is
He writes a
certainly-
lot of columns in the Union Leader. That's
Yeah,
where
well,
I
I-
know the name from mostly.
Yeah.
As I said during the break, as a columnist, he always uses 10 words when one would do. I mean,
Well, that makes you sound smarter when you do that, though.
But
it fills up the space at least.
in terms of the governor and how he's doing, I think my biggest complaint to date is that he is nominating people for these really critical jobs that don't seem to have the depth of experience
Yeah.
that I would hope they would have.
Yeah.
He nominated a person for labor commissioner who was very inexperienced. He's the mayor of Franklin, but knew nothing about important labor
You haven't
issues.
approved that nomination, have you?
It did get approved
Oh,
by
it
the
did get
executive
approved.
council. I ended up opposing it.
Yeah.
But
I would
he
be
knew
with you
nothing
on that.
about some of the real serious issues in labor protection, including misclassification. He had
Yeah.
no idea what the WARN Act was. So those are some red flags for me. I voted against him.
Yeah.
And he's nominated some other folks that haven't had experience, including someone for environmental services to be that commissioner.
Now,
of
that one was
department.
withdrawn, right?
It ended up being withdrawn because the individual really just had no passion for the environment, had no experience with environmental issues, and it was a real curious appointment, and he didn't perform that well in the public hearing. So,
Chris, can you tell us a little bit in general about these appointments?
Yeah.
These people are appointed. This is not a situation where it's just the whim of the governor to hire and fire. They're appointed for a term.
That's right.
Is that correct? What's the typical
yeah,
term?
our commissioners don't serve at the pleasure of the governor. So the governor will nominate, and the council will confirm. So that's the first important check. But the fact is, a commissioner is in for a fixed term, so it could be 3, 4, 5 years. Governor has a 2-year
Longer
term.
than the governor's
and
term.
these are all
That
staggered.
was kind of my
so,
point.
Governor Sununu won't get to reappoint or appoint new commissioners to, about a dozen different departments. But there are some that come up during his first term. If he's reelected, then he might get some more. But these commissioners serve beyond when the governor's term expires, and so that really helps spread out power and makes these commissioners a little bit independent of the governor vis-a-vis
Yeah.
where they would be in other states.
I
Yeah.
wanted to make that point because it's important that these guys get vetted properly by the council because they could be there longer
Yeah.
than the governor who appoints
Here are
them.
the important attributes that I think commissioners need to have. These are people that are running departments with hundreds of employees that provide critical services to the people of New Hampshire. I think they have to be independent and free from politics. They also have to be responsive. And so if I go to them with an issue, they have to work with me to solve it. Or if a member of the public needs help in their department, they have to help them navigate their department. And they also have to appreciate what's special about New Hampshire and what's special about our governmental structure. And I just think they need some baseline experience and knowledge of the issues that their department deals with.
I would certainly agree.
If someone can meet all those qualifications and they happen to be a conservative Republican nominee from Governor Sununu, I'll vote for them. And I voted for most of his nominees to date because I felt they've risen to that level. But there have been some for major jobs that haven't, and I've opposed them.
Yeah.
So as much as I can, I like to get to yes on the governor's appointments. It's his job to nominate. It's our job to confirm or not confirm. And so if they meet certain qualifications, I'll vote for them. If they don't, I
And
won't.
that's a very unique thing about New Hampshire. All right, we may have a caller.
We have Sandy on the line.
Hi, Sandy, you with us? Hello.
Hello.
Hi there, Sandy.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
And Mike and Chris Pappas.
Hi.
Sandy Paradise.
Hey, Sandy.
hi,
How you
Sandy.
doing?
Hi, Sandy.
Oh, pretty good. It was kind of interesting today. I was talking to a few Republicans in Goffstown.
Yep.
I happened to be there with my daughter, my youngest daughter, who lives in Goffstown. Anyway, they were talking about the kindergarten. Now, I think some people are a little mixed up on that. They don't watch the programs. Sometimes they just read what's in the paper. Sometimes I guess it's out of context, or they're not sure what they're exactly reading. And these are fairly intelligent people. But we would be Manchester would receive some money, as we already have full kindergarten. Is that correct?
Yeah, a minimum of $2 million, I think.
Yes, which we could use right now. That is for sure.
That
That
would
is
help
for
the
sure.
school
You
budget,
know,
wouldn't
Yep,
it?
absolutely right.
In Manchester, it would help the school budget enormously, and with our new superintendent, God bless him.
And the tax
And
cap.
and I was explaining to the Republicans about that. They had been thinking that some of these people had thought that our taxes were going to go up in Manchester because, the state. I said, no. I think the state is going to give us money because we already have full-time kindergarten. Then they said, well, why do we have to have full-time kindergarten? And then I said, well, I thought it over when I was a youngster. Well, I'm going to be 80 this year, in November. But when I was a youngster, we went to school a year later for kindergarten. If you can remember, maybe Bob Balkus remembers that. But we went to school 9 months to a year later than what they do now, I believe.
I think you're right.
And do you remember that, Bob?
Yes?
Yes.
Yep.
And so you were a year older. And, of course, a lot of the people who worked in those days. It would have been wonderful then. I remember my mom and dad both working. And we had to be taken care of by neighbors, which were wonderful in South Manchester. We had some wonderful neighbors down there. They were Greek people, Portuguese people that took care of my brother and I, my oldest brother and I. But I'm thinking, if we had had full-time kindergarten then, it would have been nice for my mom to come home and
Yep.
it would have been a lot easier on her and so on and everything. But I don't know. Well, Chris, you're doing a good job up there. That's all I can say.
Oh, thank you, Sandy.
And with Governor Sununu, I'm glad this Governor Sununu, actually, I like him better than I did his dad. I don't know what your opinion is of that, but I'll let you keep it to yourself.
I agree with you.
But I do think that he might work better with people. It was just like years ago when I was on the school board for 14 years. I had to stay on the school board because of the Hatch Act and because of it was partisan. I couldn't become an alderman because of the Hatch Act because I worked for Manchester Housing. I took care of elderly, and things have changed. But I think you people are doing a pretty good job. But I really. If you want me to come up to the state to lobby for that, I probably could get some people in my neighborhood or some friends, my children, to, speak about that now 2 people even more have to work than when we were kids to get a house and to raise children. And so they need the full-time kindergarten. But there's no reason why we should not be reimbursed. That's the point.
Yep.
So I'll give you a call about it someday anyway.
Okay.
But good luck.
Thanks for the call, Sandy.
Thanks for the call.
I'm going to go work for Jimmy Moran at the polls because I've known him since he was like 5 or 6 years old. And so I promised him I would work at the polls for May 23rd.
Well,
Very
he's bound to win with your support, Sandy.
Yeah.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, he's got some nice green and white signs. Joe said he was English, Joe Lavasser. I said, no, he's not English. He's French and Irish, But anyway, that's beside the point.
Okay.
Listen, have a good night, and keep up the good work, Chris. I think you people are trying to do a good job up there. And even though this governor is a Republican, I do respect him. I have worked for a few Republican governors way in the past that I did like, that I thought would do a good job. But I mean, I think he's going to work with you people, so that's good.
Thanks,
Okay.
Sandy.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling in. She makes an excellent point. Apparently, according to her, her parents both worked, but, back when my parents were around, that was not the usual model. And that's another reason why full-time kindergarten is so important. Today, most families, both parents have to work. It's not a choice that's all in favor of women having the choice, but for most women, it's not a choice. It's a requirement now. I just think, I'm so pleased that Manchester had gone ahead with full-day kindergarten, and I'm glad we're going to get some, I hope we are, I guess we're pretty close to getting some help with it. You're pretty bipartisan, Chris. I have to say that. You've never been strictly against people because they're Republicans or for people because they're Democrats.
Frustrating sometimes, but true.
You got to give the governor credit. He stood up against some significant elements of his own party to push this full-day kindergarten, which I kind of think maybe his wife deserves some credit on that because I think
The speaker was against it, right?
The speaker was against it. The speaker did not think kindergarten was a important part of the educational experience when most of the data I'm familiar with says it's perhaps the most important experience of your educational life is where you get started out getting ready to learn and being able to, interact well with others and all the things that kindergarten provided, which is, it's a child's garden. It's a child garden of learning and preparation. So that's really good. So anyhow, today up there, and I hoped I'd have a picture to show you, I was up at the State House today and walked along, and the entire corridor outside the Executive Council chambers and the governor's office was filled with protesters, and they were lying down. It was a die-in, and they had some great signs like, my health care went away so billionaires could have caviar and stuff like that. Did you see them, and what'd you think?
I did see the protesters up there, and they were reacting to Secretary Tom Price,
being here,
who was up there from Health and Human Services. He was doing a roundtable with some state leaders and folks from interest groups and the community groups that have supported people during the opioid crisis. On opioids and on behavioral health. And I think it was a real interesting display, and they really took over the State House today, so much so that they had to shuffle Tom Price through the Executive Council room, so he avoided interaction with the protesters while he was at the State House. So he never saw any of those people really lying down in the hallway. They never got a chance to tell them what they really thought about Donald Trump's health care plan.
Trump arranges some of his visits to his so-called rallies too, is very carefully choreographed to have him not have to see the protesters that are there.
But the citizen activism is very strong in New Hampshire right now. When I go to local meetings or go to the State House, there are always people out there with signs now.
Yeah.
We've seen lots of these marches. There'll be more to come. I know there's an equality march coming up in early June. So people are passionate. People want their voices to be heard. In a state like New Hampshire, I think you have a better chance of that than maybe you do other places. But I think it's a healthy sign of democracy that people are out there expressing their views.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the roundtable with Secretary Price?
I wasn't in on it because it was by invitation only. And actually, they told the press to get out after they took a few pictures at the beginning of it. So I'll have to talk with some of the commissioners that were sitting around the table at that.
Wow. Well,
I know afterward they went by one of the fire stations in Manchester.
yes, I
Really?
did see
Met
that.
with Chief Goonan.
And, Chris Hickey and
Yep.
Ted Gatzis.
And that really is a program that seems to be effective, and it's being replicated. It's being
Yeah.
used as a model
Yeah,
and
it certainly
replicated.
is. Yeah.
But now we have this new substance, carfentanil, that has appeared within
Yeah.
the past 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, obviously before, but it shows up in the news. And it sounds to me like the state is really putting their foot down when it comes to this stuff. They had a nationwide search for a particular peddler of the stuff, and they caught him, and he's facing enormous bail. And I understand now that all carfentanil cases are being referred to the Attorney General's office, not to the county attorneys. Can you tell us anything about that recent development in
Sure.
this fight on
Yeah.
these drugs?
You know, it came up for discussion when the new Attorney General was being vetted by the council. Actually, he really wanted to make the fight against the opioid crisis his top priority, and I think this is a sign of that. I supported him. I think he'll do a great job on this and a number of other fronts. But it's such a dangerous substance. You know, 1 grain of this can kill someone, and not to mention, the first responders,
Relief
that
workers, people who are
that's
going to
right,
help
are
these
trying
people
to
can
assist this
get it
person.
on their
It's
skin,
very
and it can be
dangerous
deadly.
for them. So this is a new level, and I think their serious approach to this is warranted. We've got to show that there's no place for this in New Hampshire or any other, substance that someone might misuse in this fashion. But the crisis continues. You mentioned safe stations. I think that's one of the great signs of the creative response to this, a real grassroots effort across New Hampshire. How can we solve this? What can we do in our own community to address this? And that grew out of efforts right here in Manchester. So hopefully we can continue to empower people, but also at the state level, I know we got to work hard to make sure we get the resources out to the community so they can address this, and that we build out the networks that haven't been there, the beds that haven't been there. People can't detox. They can't, find a bed to get better in. That continues to be an issue where we need more work.
During Governor Hassan's term, there was the beginnings of an effort to address the problem from the prescription side of things, the opioid prescription, the overprescription of opioids.
Sure.
In fact, looking even further to the overselling by the pharmaceutical companies of the pain medications to the doctors. And it seems like that whole effort was thwarted by very powerful forces. Is that still going on, or?
No, I believe that there was, some success to that, and those programs continue. There was a prescription drug monitoring program that was set up. New Hampshire was unfortunately the last state to set up this type of program. There's federal money available for it, but that is up and running and will be renewed on a regular basis, assuming there's funding coming from Washington to do that. One of the other things that the council helped launch was, giving funding to the Attorney General to do investigations of mismarketing of opioids. And so Attorney General Foster at the time in his department spent a lot of work on this. There were some settlements with some major drug manufacturers on this, and so money actually came back to the state that would be used for treatment, prevention, recovery, education programs. So that's a good sign, and that's something that I asked the new Attorney General quite a bit about, and my hope is that that effort in terms of the investigations will continue if it's necessary.
Break time. Be a
I
quick
could,
break.
I could
It'll
use
be
a break. I'm
folks.
exhausted. Boy, I need a rest. This has been a tough segment.
Well, we got more to go. We got more things to talk about with Chris Pappas, 4th District Executive Counselor. And we'll have a little time left, and we'll be right back. Hi, everybody. We're back. This is the final segment. You know, we always do three, and this is our third and therefore final. We're very pleased to have with us tonight Executive Counselor Chris Pappas. I think it's his first appearance since he started his new term for the first time being an executive counselor under a Republican governor, John Sununu. And
Chris Sununu.
Chris Sununu. What did I say? Oh my
You're
gosh.
back in time.
I am way back in time. Chris Sununu, thank you. And we're learning a lot about how the council is working on the issues of the day with this new makeup. The council is I think everybody knows, is a unique New Hampshire institution, almost unique to Hampshire and unique in the power that it has over contracts,
a council in
appointments.
Massachusetts, but they don't have the same.
They don't have the same power, and that's the only other state, I believe, that has an executive council at all. So it's quite a unique New Hampshire institution. And we're proud of it, and we hope to keep it, especially when we've got councilors like Chris Pappas that can provide such good insight and lots of benefits to the council from the many things he's done. So I thought we might talk for a minute about a couple of the issues of the day that are very important coming through the council. One is the mental health crisis and the need for expansion of our treatment facilities at the New Hampshire Hospital. And, we've turned over the management of that to Dartmouth Hitchcock, and then there's some controversy about
issues.
that, whether whether they are meeting their requirements under the contract. They say they are. Some people say they aren't. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The state has had a long-term relationship with Dartmouth Hitchcock. Used to be Dartmouth College at the time before the positions were transferred to the medical facility. But they provide the docs at New Hampshire Hospital. So the psychiatrists and other medical professionals that are there generally are provided through that contract. We went to renew it last year. It went out for bid. Dartmouth was the only one that bid on it. But at the time, they made that switch from having the docs at the college, and they brought them over to DHMC. When they did that, they weren't negotiating the terms of employment with these folks. They gave them an offer. They said, take it or leave it. And unfortunately, they lost quite a few qualified people at a time when there's a scarcity of psychiatrists in the state of New Hampshire. So the state was very concerned, the council was very concerned that they wouldn't be able to step up and provide the quality of care that we expect at New Hampshire Hospital, where they deal with crisis patients, some folks that are going through very acute mental illness. There's no room for error when it comes to providing those people care. So we want to make sure that the numbers were there, that they could recruit, that they could provide the docs under this contract. So we were getting weekly status reports from Dartmouth Hitchcock that would outline where the contract said they needed to be and how many positions they had on site. Now, I noticed a couple weeks ago the number started to dip quite a bit. I asked some questions of the department. It turned out that the benchmarks we were using in those status reports were off, and they were underestimating the number that we actually needed, and so they were even further away from where they needed to be than we thought they were. It ended up that the president at New Hampshire Hospital was relieved of his duties, and the governor and commissioner are very concerned and want a plan of corrective action from Dartmouth Hitchcock to see that they can come into compliance with this contract. This is one area where Republicans and Democrats are working together because it's so important to the overall health of people in the state.
Yeah.
You look at Elliott Hospital and the number of patients that are there in the waiting room, mental health patients
Which is
that
really unconscionable.
can't get out in the community or can't get up, if they are
Or end up
experiencing a
getting their
crisis,
neck
to New
broken
Hampshire
at
Hospital.
Valley Street Jail,
Exactly right. And so New Hampshire Hospital is that safety valve that we need to make sure
which we
those,
do not have.
Yeah.
There is no safety valve. It doesn't exist right now.
it's the beds aren't there.
Correct.
We need
Yeah,
to
for those
expand.
that
We
can't
need
get
to
in there.
expand the
That's my point.
facility.
Right.
That's
It
my
needs to
point.
be expanded. We need more resources out in the community too to, make sure we're not dealing with people when they get to a crisis situation, that we are giving them the health care that they need to live healthy, productive lives, right? And so New Hampshire has let its mental health system, wither. It has not been providing the type of funding it needed over the last few years.
We've known
and
this
decades.
we've known this for decades.
There's been
Chris.
a lawsuit. There's a settlement. There are steps the state needs to continue to take but we need a more robust response. What's happening now is not acceptable, and we can't settle for less from an important partner like Dartmouth Hitchcock. So we're drawing a line in the sand and making sure that they can step up to the plate and deliver the.
So do you think they're going to be able to do
can.
that?
I believe they can. I mean, they're.
You got to spend money.
They have about 10,000 employees.
Yeah.
They're an important world-class medical facility. You wouldn't think twice about getting care up at Dartmouth Hitchcock. So they have a good network. I think they can do it. The resources are there. It's just about getting the job done.
What's
Yeah.
the deadline for them to come into compliance?
So they needed a corrective action plan submitted yesterday. I haven't seen what they've done. And then the state would take 5 days to assess whether or not that's viable. So I would say by the end of the month, they've got to come into compliance.
Okay, well, stay tuned on that one.
Yeah, that's a
This
very
is-
important issue. The state of New Hampshire has been woefully inadequate in its treatment of its good citizens who have mental health issues, repeatedly, year upon year, upon year upon year, upon decade, and to find out that the minimum that we're offering is not even being met, and we're still cutting checks to this organization and not withholding payment, I think is appalling.
Yeah. So that kind of morphs into another discussion that's, I guess this is not particularly an executive council issue, but, can we have our entire health care, Obamacare, the ACA, is under serious threat. The so-called repeal and replace, the replacement doesn't seem very good. In the House of Representatives, and the president is determined that he's going to undo the signature achievement of the Obama administration on the domestic front. In New Hampshire, after a really serious struggle, even with Republican control of the State House, did agree to the Medicaid expansion as part of this. And now we have to renew that. I mean, it was part of the deal was it could only be a two-year agreement. How do you think that's going to work out, and does the Executive Council have any role in this, or is it strictly up to the legislature?
Yes, we do have a role. We did have a role in terms of standing up the program initially. We have two managed care organizations that help run the Medicaid program in New Hampshire, and so we needed amendments to that to make that work. But I'm a strong supporter of this. There's no better tool in the fight against the opioid crisis
Exactly.
than providing this coverage, which helps build out those networks because people now have health insurance, and facilities can get paid, and so there's an incentive for the development of better treatment and recovery services in New Hampshire. So that's really helped drive things. You've got 50,000 people in the New Hampshire Health Protection Program.
Yeah, which
You
is
have-
Medicaid expansion.
You have a total of 140,000 in Medicaid overall that now have access to treatment for substance use disorder under Medicaid. So that was a change that came about in the last few years, and I think we can't sunset this. We can't pull the rug out from under
We
these
can't.
people
But-
and
but
pull
it's
the
a-
rug
But
out
it-
from under our
But
efforts.
legally, it's possible,
It could
and it
happen.
could happen.
That's right.
And so this is I think maybe the most critical fight. It was the number one thing that Governor Hassan wanted to do and did accomplish, with some significant help from important
But
Republican
that was
leaders.
with a promise of 90% payment by the federal government.
Right.
If
Right.
that promise goes away or
that
is in
promise goes
doubt,
away.
which it is, I
It's a
mean, I
good
think
point.
as a matter of fact, that promise is in serious doubt right now.
It's very
we
serious
don't know what's
doubt.
going to
Yeah.
happen.
Well-
And even with the 90% federal payment, it was a tough battle to get it passed.
Yeah.
With that in doubt, do you think that they're not going to let it sunset?
Well, it was 100% the first few years, and then 90% thereafter. And the federal government, has never reneged on its responsibility for the traditional Medicaid program, for that payment scheme. So I don't think we should expect them to do this here. I think the Trump care is something that's very concerning. You saw those protests today at the State House.
Very dramatic.
Because of it. As an employer, I can't understand why we should be going backward. I think that we've got to care for people. I know people that work for me need their benefits, and I'm glad to be a part of that process. But we can work to make this better. If there are tweaks that need to be made, we don't need to upend the whole system. And for New Hampshire and for the struggles that we're going through, it's such a key piece of things.
Yeah.
But as much as the three of us at this table might agree on that, that's not what's going on down in Washington and out in the countryside. I mean,
Or
they're
in
Yeah.
some places,
hell-bent. They want to tear
or in
this
some
thing
elements
down.
of our political system in Concord too. I mean,
Well, what's interesting is you see a switch in the public opinion on this issue.
That's true,
For a long
yeah.
period of time, Obamacare, as it was called, or the Affordable Care Act, was not popular in opinion polls. Now
Hey,
people are
devastating.
realizing
But
that
they wanted their pre-existing conditions covered. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
and they
The
want to keep
details
their
of it
kids
they
on
were
until
in
they're
favor of.
26,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
want important wellness provisions that are in there. So yeah, the more people learn about it, the more they understand it's not President Obama's health plan. It's something that really impacts their family in important ways. They become more positive about it. They don't want it to go away. So let's make it better. Let's
Yeah.
tweak it if we need to. But
And there's reasons
the
to
el-
be optimistic about this too. I mean, I do think
Yeah.
the American public, by and large, has now come to think it's a good thing and to expect the government to help provide health care access
Yeah.
for the citizens of this country.
Yeah, the
Not
key-
a perfect system, but
There
far better than what we had.
There was a great piece of videotape that I saw with Donald Trump sitting down with the Prime Minister of Australia talking about the repeal of the health care bill. And in that conversation, he says, I'm embarrassed to say that you have better health care in Australia than we do here. And all I can say is I'm all for it because they have a single-payer
They have a
system
single
there,
payer government
which is,
system.
something that I've been on that bandwagon since I was about 15 years old. So kind of interesting that he would make that comment.
In no country that's ever gone to, what the Republicans like to call socialized medicine, I say, a guarantee of health care for all, has ever turned its back. And I like to cite the example of the UK. It doesn't matter whether the Conservatives or the Tories take power. Nobody dares to suggest that they do away with the national health system.
No, they love it.
They
The
love
people
it.
love it there.
They love it there. I love it there. My son's there. It helps him out.
but you can't say that the Affordable Care Act isn't saving lives, isn't helping realize better health outcomes.
Well, I
It's
heard-
doing that in important
I
ways.
heard a very
Yeah.
good statistic. The big complaint has been, look at how the premiums on the exchanges have skyrocketed. Look at how they skyrocketed this year alone. Trump used that in his campaign speeches up and down the countryside. But I heard a very interesting statistic. Even if you include the large premium increases that took place that may take place this year, these were just proposals, the insurance premium rate increased over the course of Obamacare by 7%. Comparable time prior to that, it was 12%. So while yes, it did increase, it is not increasing just a little over half as fast. So there has been great strides made. Imagine what the premiums would have been without the Affordable Care Act.
Right. That's a good point. And there is beginning to be some decrease in the annual rate of increase of medical care costs overall, which is way out.
And
of
that
hand.
happens when people get preventative care. That's a slow curve. You're going to see that benefit increase over the course of time after people have had 5, 6, 7 years of preventive care.
So one other thing I wanted to get to, because it's going to be the subject of our program next week, and you're sort of involved.
We
is
don't
the
have time to start a new topic,
bike.
though.
I got to.
We'll tease it in.
Well, okay. This does go by way too fast, Chris. But
Yeah.
I know the Puritan is going to be one of the, I think, initial 6 stations to, get bikes. You can, for a modest fee on a credit card, you'll be able to access and ride around town and, make Manchester more pedestrian bike friendly. And so I'm looking forward to that. And we're going to talk about that next week. I'm
That's
glad
great.
that the Puritan is providing.
No, this is an exciting proposal. I'm glad it's coming to Manchester. It's going to add to the quality of life here. This is a bike share program. There are going to be a number of stations around town that businesses and organizations are sponsoring. And I think later in May, maybe early June, is when it's going to be launched. I don't have the exact date. You'll probably share that with us next week. But
I will.
I can't wait to get on one of these bikes and ride it around town.
Yeah. Well, as a former runner, I'm sure you're very fit and ready to ride bikes many miles.
I'll have to practice, make sure I can still get on.
Okay, the other
It's
thing
like riding a bike once in a
the
while.
other
Yes.
thing I just wanted to mention is that this Saturday at 10 a.m., the city committee will be holding its caucuses to elect, award officers at
officers,
the
city
Institute of
officers.
Politics at St. Anselm, and we're hoping for a good big turnout. there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm in support of the Democrats committees all over the state, including here in Manchester. We have a large number of new participants. We're really glad to see that. But next week, we'll be back with Carol Gaiman and Will Stewart. I believe they'll both be here to talk more about this wonderful bike share program, which is so exciting, and I'm just delighted to see it. Chris, thanks for coming in. It's always
Thanks
a pleasure
as
to have
always.
you
Thank
here.
you, Chris.
Can't wait to be back.
And we'll look forward to that, too.
Great.
See you next
Okay.
week, folks.